time, a breathtaking fairy tale palace in the snow-capped mountains of Bavaria in southern Germany that influenced Walt Disney. Created for the eccentric king Ludwig II, Neuschwanstein Castle is both a visual and engineering marvel, making it one of the world's greatest palaces. The village of Schwangau, 117 kilometers southwest of Munich, is the gateway to the fantastical Neuschwanstein Castle. Sitting in the Alps, the 19th century structure was the home of King Ludwig II of Bavaria. Inspired by the operas of German composer Richard Wagner, King Ludwig created Neuschwanstein to look medieval, but it was kitted out with all the latest innovations. Within 2 years of becoming king, Ludwig's Bavaria joined forces with Austria in a war with their neighbors to the north, Prussia, but were defeated. In 1870, Bavaria joined their former adversaries in the Franco-Prussian War with France. The German state won, and Prussia became all-powerful.
The German Empire was proclaimed, and the King of Prussia became Emperor of Germany, which meant that not only had Bavaria lost its independence, but Ludwig had lost his role in life.
A king without a kingdom, Ludwig had already decided to build his own. Bavaria had been left with little power after the war, and the disillusioned monarch chose to shun the political life in Munich. Instead, in 1869, Ludwig headed into the Bavarian mountains to build himself a palatial home, Neuschwanstein Castle. But the construction workers soon found out that building a castle on top of a mountain was really as difficult as it sounds.
There are huge problems with building on the side of a ravine, and it's very dependent on the type of rock. But in a place that is prone to poor weather, where there is freezing so that water gets in small fissures or cracks in the stonework and in the rock of the foundations, and then freezes and expands and cracks and fractures the rock, then you continuously have a problem with bits of the facade falling off or the very foundations on which the whole building is built crumbling away. And this is the problem the castle has. It looks like it's been there for centuries. It is only just over 100 years old, and yet right from the beginning it has suffered from these problems that it needs continual maintenance, and it started falling apart before they even finished constructing it.
It is actually an enormous building in terms of height, and it is a very stable building. And we ask ourselves, well, how does he do this? It's actually, for the most part, a steel-framed building. And he sets up a steel frame that can carry then an enormous amount of weight. Then between the steel frames is actually brick. Brick isn't too terribly heavy. And what he then does, and this is all very modern, I mean, it's almost breaking edge, pushing the envelope of construction engineering is what he's doing. He then clads it, I should say, he gives a veneer in the beautiful limestone that we see on the building itself. And that wonderful monochromatic is quarried in those mountains. So it creates an indivisibility between the architecture, the build, and then the landscape behind in which it is found.
The king played an integral role in the structural engineering of Neuschwanstein.
The input of Ludwig in the construction side was enormous. So he wanted to see every plan for every detail. And the more detailed things got, the more detailed his choosings became.
Hat auf jedes noch so kleine Detail geachtet. Die Architekten durften Vorschläge machen und nach seinen Maßgaben dann die Pläne zeichnen. Aber derjenige, der auch noch die letzten kleinen Dinge bestimmt hat, war nur allein der König und sonst niemand.
After living in temporary accommodation on the construction site, Ludwig was finally able to move into his still incomplete new home in 1884. 15 years after he'd laid the first stone.
This is a castle, but it was also a palace. It was planned by Ludwig as his home. He wanted to live there and spend his life there. And every room that was finished, every part of the castle, bears the imprint of Ludwig's personality.
It's all very well being inspired by fantasy, but fantasy is fantasy because it is unachievable. To try and produce the ultimate fantasy castle, that is something else. And this created huge challenges for his architects. They would come up with dreams of what the castle could be, which were far grander than Ludwig could ever afford.
This castle costs about 6.1 million gold mark. It's a bit difficult to say in nowadays money because you can't really compare. If I would be forced to tell you an equivalent, it could be about 95 million euros.